The 2026 NHL draft season is now here with the NHL Central Scouting preliminary rankings having dropped. Today, we're breaking down the biggest risers, early surprises, and who's already separating themselves from the pack. And you're going to want to know all of these names before everybody else.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USA Scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the newly dropped rankings from NHL Central Scouting. These are not numbered rankings. Those are only going to be coming later in the season, but we do have hundreds of players listed into A, B, C, and W grades, which we're going to be explaining a little bit more here after the intro. But what we have learned here is some of the separation between players, some of the big risers, some of the early fallers, and who might be some early candidates to be mid to late round gems on draft day. So a lot to look forward to here on today's episode, where we're going to be talking about loads, including the notable first round candidates, the European firepower that we have in this year's draft class, as well as the big time risers, and who is just ranked too low, in my opinion, here so far on Central Scouting's list, because a couple names certainly do stand out. But before we jump into everything here, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app today by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, Central Scouting list is here. If you want to follow along a little bit, I will link it down below in the description, both on YouTube and on your favorite podcasting platform. So you can take a little bit of a gander to see the number of names that are listed here. And we're not going to be naming all of them, because we'd be sitting here for an hour doing nothing other than just listing names and butchering some pronunciations. But we will be highlighting some of the notable first round candidates. We'll do a bit of a quick fire round for the top end of the first, the obvious guys that are in this range, as well as some players that have made their mark in the first round in the second segment. And in the final one, we're going to be looking at a couple notable names, the goaltending cluster there in the second and third rounds, as well as 4 players that are just not ranked high enough. So let's kick things off here with the high-end names. And there's a lot to like here. There's a lot of high-end players that are obviously going to make the cut in this range. Obviously, you have your Gavin McKenna's, who we've already been talking about here a lot on the podcast, as well as Keaton Verhoef of North Dakota in the NCAA, who's gotten off to a really good start to his career. He's a bit chaotic for a blue liner for a lot of people's preferences, but isn't he dynamic? He can always make something happen, and he has an absolute howitzer of a shot from the point. So very exciting player there from the NCAA. You got Ivar Stenberg and his high-end dynamism obviously making the cut here as an A-grade player, and A grades signifying first-round caliber. We're not actually separating in these rankings first overall to 30th overall. If they're first-round caliber, they get the A next to their name. If they're second or third-round caliber, they get a nice little B. And then for the middle rounds, so rounds 4 to 5, you get a C grade, and then you get onto the watch list as a potential late round swing in the 6th or 7th rounds. And there are a couple standouts that did fall all the way down to a watch list category, who we'll mention a bit later on the show here. But for the time being, we're looking at the big boys. So you've got your Ryan Rubricks as well, who is a fantastic scorer, but the consistency and the motor are kind of still in flux in the OHL. And we'll see if the 41 goals that he scored last season, which was the most since John Tavares as a D-1 in the OHL, if that's going to be able to translate this season, where the motor has just taken a bit of a step back and he just looks disengaged on many shifts, but still a very skilled player. And if he does fall to the teens, a team's going to have a really good shot at a player with elite level tools in his toolkit. Then we've got Ethan Belchets, who's making a really good run for second overall in this year's draft class. Just a skilled, disgusting power playmaker. He's massive. He's mean. He's incredibly creative with the puck on his stick. Tynan Lawrence hasn't played yet this season with the Muskegon Lumberjacks after dragging them all the way to a Clark Cup championship last season in the USHL. Unfortunately, suffered a freak injury in training here this season, but he should be back in the coming weeks. He's a two-way center with a bunch of speed, molds his game after Nick Suzuki, and it really shines through in how he approaches every single shift on the ice. The work ethic, the skill, the processing speed, the intelligence are all really, really high-end with this player. Then you've got Ryan Lynn as just the best two-way and most overall just polished defenseman in this draft class from the WHL. And Xavier Villeneuve, who we talked about in the last episode, with all of his skill and dynamism from the point and playmaking activations. He's just a Lane Hudson style of player who certainly is getting his due diligence here as an A-grade talent by NHL Central Scouting. So I think they definitely got that one right. And you also have guys like Carson Carroll's another mobile defenseman from the WHL. Mathis Preston, very, very skilled goal scorer. He kind of plays like Berkeley Catton in terms of how he's able to blend skill and speed, but he's a bit more leaning goal scoring, where Catton's more of a playmaker. He loves to shoot the puck. Remember the name Mathis Preston. He is dynamism embodied. And last but not least here, in terms of the obvious guys in the quick fire round here to kick off the show, we've got Chase Reed, another very mobile right shot defenseman this time, a guy that's able to impose himself physically, already a very just mature player at both ends of the ice, and a guy that could definitely make a case for himself in the top 12 of this year's draft class. But I wanted to highlight, because the last couple drafts have seen a couple classes that have been a bit weaker on the European side, especially in terms of the Finnish caliber prospects, in terms of first-round talents. That is changing this year. We've got some really exciting guys. Of course, we already mentioned Ivar Stenberg. He is the pick of the litter among European-based and European developed prospects in this year's class, but it certainly does not end there. You've got a player like Oliver Suvanto, who I don't think we've really mentioned in depth yet on the podcast, but he's incredibly fun to watch. We had him ranked at 20th overall in our preliminary rankings at Elite Prospects, and he could still be rising beyond that. This guy is a name to watch. A lot to like with this player. He's already made his Liga debut a month ago. He was the first 2008-born skater to do so in Liga this year, and he just brings a whole bunch of skill and size and projectability to the equation. Definitely a player to keep an eye on if you want to keep up with the draft eligibles of note here this season. But beyond him, you have guys like Malte Gustafsson, a defenseman who also, of course, skates brilliantly because he's developed in Sweden, and seemingly they all do. But he's another player to really keep an eye on, developing in junior hockey with HV71 in their system. He's a guy that stands at 6'4", 198 pounds. We had him ranked 16th overall in our preliminary rankings, and he's very young for the draft class, as well as a June 11th birthday. And so far this season, he's mostly played at the U20 Nacional level, scoring 7 points through 11 games. And he's very young, has a lot of physical runway in terms of filling out his frame. He denies entries off the rush. He's engaged physically, seals the puck on retrievals, and he fights to keep his inside positioning. He's just all around a very projectable, defensive-leaning NHL player, but we really want to see him playing in some professional games here this season to see how he takes that next step against adult competition. Another player to really keep an eye on here this season is Albert Smits, a Latvian player, defenseman playing in the Hurlbert'S system in Finland, a 6'3", 205-pound left shot defenseman. And this guy is just dynamic. He's already played 13 games in Liga, where he scored 3 goals and 5 points. He's actually playing some really big minutes. He's played over 24 minutes, 23 minutes, multiple times so far this season against adult competition. And He's not the best Liga draft eligible defenseman ever, but he certainly is one of the most toolsy players to play at this level at this age. The decision making, the maturity in terms of the mind has a lot of room to still grow, and we want to see that develop here in the coming months and years. But the physical ability, the skating, the handling, he's constantly moving his feet, moving the puck. There's so much to like with this player, and especially in terms of his ability to hang on to possession under pressure. He's a guy to keep your eye on. So we definitely have some Europeans to really like in this draft class, and I think that NHL Central Scouting really showcased this in their rankings here, having multiple European-based A-grade players. And just to list off a few other guys that are right in this range, you've got Elton Hermanson, a really good offensive player. I really liked his shot so far in my early viewings. Might be a sniper in the making. You've got Marcus Nordmark having a very big frame, and another Finn here in Juho Piiparainen to keep an eye on in terms of first round caliber projections in the eyes of NHL Central Scouting. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we're only going to be focusing on 3 names, and those are 3 risers who made their way into the first round conversation here on NHL Central Scouting's board. J.P. Hurlbert, Brooks Rogowski, and Caleb Malhotra. But first, a quick message here from our sponsors at Locked On NHL Prospects. Let's be honest, most of us can't even name all of our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together, making it one clean, easy-to-use interface that you can use anywhere on your laptop or even on your mobile device. Monarch's visual dashboards and smart tools make it so much easier to understand where my money is going and how to make it work harder for me. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, breaking down the NHL Central Scouting preliminary rankings here. And we want to slow things down a bit. We named a lot of players there in the first segment. I can understand if maybe you're a bit overwhelmed with new information, new names to keep track of. It's going to be a little bit easier here in the second because we're only talking about a trio of guys. And we're kicking it off with a player who has absolutely been lighting up the CHL since making the switch from the NTDP here this season. Instead of playing his draft eligible year with the players he was playing with last season in the U17s, and the program has really been struggling in terms of creating offense, so seemingly he made a very smart decision. That is J.P. Hurlbert of the Kamloops Blazers in the WHL, and wow, has he just been fun to watch here early on. He's played in 11 games, scored 11 goals, added 13 assists for 24 points so far this campaign. The production is absurd, to put it lightly. He doesn't just lead the WHL in scoring, he leads it by 6 points. We are just over 10 games into the season, and the next highest scorer, it's actually tied between 3 players, Julius Miettinen, Matthias Vanhanen, and Cooper Gazowski with 18 on the season, so 24 is just obscene. And I'm not sure if this is still the case, but at least as of last week, he was also top in the entire CHL in scoring. As a 17-year-old, first time playing in the CHL player, that is nothing to scoff at. He didn't actually crack our first round at Elite Prospects in our preliminary rankings that came out a month ago. That is certainly going to change when we do our updated version because he's just been so electric. But this is not to say that he's going to be a top 10 selection. I still think that there are some limitations to his game, but he's really taken a big step in the start of the season in his ability to link plays between his line mates, the give and go game, the high pace interchanges, the deceptiveness that comes with not being constantly the guy that hangs onto the puck for too long and tries to do everything on his own. His scoring comes from working at a higher rate, getting down low into the dangerous spaces, and being able to slow play down off the rush. So many players in this age group always try to ramp up the pace, always think that they have to go faster, execute more quickly. Being able to slow things down at the right moment can open up so much ice, allow your teammates to catch up to you, and allow you to really read what's happening in front of you to select the best play rather than the most intuitive one for you at your highest speeds, which are often, at least at this age, not the same thing. So J.P. Hurlbert has certainly announced himself as a high-end goal scorer, especially in tight around the net here this season. But it's been his playmaking that's really shown the most, at least in the last week or two here. Had a 4-assist game in a 4-3 overtime victory against the Regina Pats, getting involved on every single goal. And he's a player that just constantly creates through his energy. And I think that's such a great quality to have at this age. So J.P. Hurlbert has certainly earned himself an A grade here at Central Scouting. I think a whole lot of scouting outlets are going to be following in his footsteps. So definitely not a player to keep ignoring here early on in the season. And next, we're going to make a lot of us feel old because we've got Manny Malhotra's son in the conversation. Caleb Malhotra, a young player in the draft class, June 2nd, 08 birthday. He's a 6 foot, 170-pound left shot center, and he's been playing with the Brantford Bulldogs here this season. He's another CHL rookie, just dominating out of the gate. He's played 10 games. He has 16 points. Last season, he was playing in the BCHL with the Chilliwack Chiefs, where he only put up 8 goals and 26 points in 44 games. So that big spike in production maybe is going to slow down a little bit here as the year progresses because his early season pace is barely sustainable. I think that he's definitely a player that shows so much value beyond just the production, but he still sits at third in OHL scoring behind Adam Bannock and Jake O'Brien. He's ahead of players that are older than him who have a lot more experience and are drafted, guys like Merrick Van Acker, first-round pick from the Chicago Blackhawks, Edison Engel, one of the steals of the draft last year, going to the Winnipeg Jets. He's a defenseman to keep an eye on. And Sam McHugh of the Toronto Maple Leafs, all guys that have draft pedigree and are older, more experienced, have played multiple seasons of junior hockey at this point. And yet, Caleb Malhotra has been out producing them. So what is the style of play here? I really think that it's the details that make him pop. And if you ever watched his pops play in the NHL, you can tell that details run in the family. Manny Malhotra, renowned for being a face-off wizard. That aspect of the game hasn't quite been like a dominant facet just yet for Caleb, but he has a couple of years to kind of have those summer training sessions with his dad. But I think that the details, the two-way intensity, the relentlessness on the penalty kill where he just hounds puck carriers, but his timing and execution are also kind of developing still, but more often than not, strengths in his game. And if you compare that with a really blossoming playmaking game in the offensive zone, I think you have yourself a really exciting talent that certainly has earned himself consideration inside the first round here. And for the final name here for the second segment, we're sticking in the OHL with Brooks Rogowski. And if you're a fan of big boys, this is a player for you. Stands at 6'7", playing with the Oshawa Generals in the Ontario Hockey League as a big right shot centerman. 6'6", actually officially listed, 227 pounds. He's a really big guy. He's even younger than Caleb Malhotra as a June 28th, 2008 birthday. So there's actually a chance he gets drafted on his birthday. The draft always falls right around then in late June. So that would be fun to see. If it's on his 18th birthday, he gets to celebrate his selection. And he's gotten off to a very strong start. He's already more than halfway to matching his point total from last season with Oshawa when he got 23 points in 66 games. He's up to 13-13 here this season. Just very, very consistent on the production standpoint. Had a very big game here just a day ago against the Peterborough Petes on Monday. scoring 4 assists in a 6-4 victory. But to quote a scouting report from my colleague Mitch Brown at Elite Prospects, this is also in a game against Peterborough, but from a couple days prior, he writes, Rogowski was the Gen's best player in a tough loss. He opened the scoring with an interception and snipe, an outside leg wrister with basically perfect form top shelf. He's a skilled player, but he plays a relatively linear game. He attacks the middle, passes wide, and rushes the net. One play directly led to an assist. He skates every route to completion, always ending at the net front, shows reception and off-the-catch shooting skill, and draws pressure in a bit before passing the puck. He wasn't dynamic in this game, but it's easy to see the potential to develop that given his surprisingly deep and stable stance, though his quickness could improve a little bit, full reach handling skill, and a desire to claim the middle of the rink. He showed a bit of meanness in this game too, but his physicality was best expressed through his battle level and net crashing ability. Even if he doesn't become a line driver in the OHL, he could still become a plug-and-play bottom six center in the National Hockey League. Excited to watch his growth this season. And I've only watched one game of Rogowski so far this season, but all of that resonates. He's not always the player that stands out the most for his skill on the ice, but the frame makes him just stand out every single viewing. He's very involved as a player, and I think that domination of the middle lane and the net front ability at that size are just two skills that give you a much clearer pathway to the National Hockey League than most of the prospects that you're contending with, especially in the late first round. Teams really like their slam dunk 70+% likelihood guys to hit the NHL in some capacity when they're drafting between 20th and 32nd overall. And I think that Rogowski really fits the mold of the style of player that goes in that range. So those are 3 risers that NHL Central Scouting has highlighted, making their marks in the first round range of the 2026 NHL entry draft. And in the final segment, we're going to go a bit wild again in terms of naming a bunch of names, including 7 goaltenders that have made their mark as second or third round candidates. But first, a quick message here from our sponsors at Locked On NHL Prospects. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the entire app. I love using FanDuel because it gives me so many ways to play. I've built parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live lines during the game while the action is unfolding right in front of me. The same game parlays are definitely my favorite way to get involved because I'm able to combine multiple guesses from even multiple different games to increase my odds at hitting big in one fell swoop. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today to get started. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment. And first and foremost, I wanted to give a quick shout out to one player that I've liked a lot in my early season viewings, who is getting his due recognition here from NHL Central Scouting. And it put a bit of a smile on my face to see him listed as a B-grade prospect. And that is Landon Hafele of the Green Bay Gamblers, a player who played with the NTDP U18s last season because he is an 07 birthday. And he was only a checking guy last year, so I didn't see the full-on upside. But this year, he's been given the keys to the car in Green Bay, and he has just run with the opportunity. He's an incredibly hardworking player. He doesn't have the biggest frame to really help him in his pursuit of NHL stardom someday. 6 feet tall, 187 pounds, but that work rate is just, it compensates for everything. He's always the hardest worker on the ice. He's up to 10 points and 5 goals in 10 games so far this season. He's also landed himself 25 penalty minutes, including 1 game misconduct for a boarding head into the boards kind of penalty, which just came from him trying to be a little bit too aggressive. It wasn't targeted. It was just him being super intense. And he's also a guy who's going over to Arizona State University next season. So this is a player that, through his motor, net front ability to just drive the middle of the ice, get to the net front, even though he isn't the biggest, I have a bunch of respect for players that play this style of game. I think that they have a higher likelihood of hitting the NHL compared to a lot of other profiles of players that we see in the second or third rounds. And I think Hafele is an absolute gem. So very nice to see him getting that recognition. But another thing of note here in terms of the Central Scouting rankings is the number of netminders that they have going in the second and third rounds as B-grade talents. There are 7 of them. That is a lot. There is no goaltender in the first round here this season, but 7 in the B-grade category. And I just want to kind of list them off and put them on your radars. I haven't watched all these players play. I focus a bit more on skaters in my own research and in my scouting, but just to get them on your radar, we've got Harrison Bettiger of the Kelowna Rockets playing with the NTDP last season, a guy that really stood out in my viewings for his composure and intelligence in the crease. We've got Zachary Jovanovski from the Guelph Storm in the OHL. No relation to Ed. He's not from the same family. I did check before making this episode. We've got Brady Noling of the NTDP this season, the current starting netminder with the program, a player that is also a fairly simple netminder, not the most flashy, not the most like dynamic in his post-to-post transitions, but just keeps things simple. And I think that simplicity is going to make him a top 96 pick on draft day. And the platform of being the starting netminder with the program certainly does not hurt. We've got Jan Laris of the Drummondville Voltigeurs in the QMJHL. František Politin from Pelicans U20 over in Finland. Tobias Treball of the Youngstown Phantoms in the USHL, a player that's gotten off to a fantastic start to his young career in the USHL. A guy that I've really liked so far in my viewings and may just be stealing the starters crease there from more experienced and older netminders that he's competing with. He's 6'4", 185 pounds as a rare right-catching netminder. And 907 save percentage through 6 games so far this season, and he's 4-1-1. Really has cemented himself as the starting option there in Youngstown, which is pretty impressive considering that he has 2 elements of competition that are at least a year or 2 years older than he is. Then we've got, last but not least, Jacoby Wiener from the Moncton Wildcats, a really big netminder. He's a Harvard commit, 6'4", takes up a lot of space, but hasn't gotten off to the smoothest start to the campaign. He's only played like 2 games so far this year, and he's let in quite a few goals. But I just wanted to kind of highlight the netminders here because there's always a couple goalie fanatics that watch the show, and just to give you guys a little bit of content, these are definitely names that we'll be talking about more as the draft cycle progresses and as I actually get my eyes on all of these names. But certainly fun to see how many players are in the same glut here in terms of the netminders in the 2026 NHL draft. But to wrap up the show, I wanted to name 4 players that, in my opinion, are ranked significantly too low in these rankings. And a couple of these are almost egregious, in my opinion. We're going to start off with the strangest one of the bunch to me, and that is Adam Valentini of the Michigan Wolverines. To me, a guy that's going to go, or I thought was going to go, between 25th and 40th overall, like late first, early second range. They have him down as a watch list player, which is 6th to 7th round. Valentini is already built like an NHL player. He's incredibly sturdy. He's hardworking. He's engaged. He's got a lot of hype behind him for multiple seasons coming through the GOHL with the Toronto Marlboros being like a real star there, and then having a very good rookie campaign in the USHL last season with the Chicago Steel. Definitely had a bit of a strange thing happening, having committed to the Kitchener Rangers in the OHL and then pulling out right before the season started to switch over to the University of Michigan a year early instead. But so far this season, he's up to 6 points in 6 games in college hockey. And yeah, Michigan has had a couple absolute blowout victories, including an 11-1 win over Mercyhurst on opening night and a 10-2 victory against Robert Morris University here this past weekend. And he's gotten points in all of those, but he's gotten points in every game but one here this season. Had a 2-goal performance in the first 4-2 victory against Robert Morris University this weekend as well. Really starting to get into the score sheet, and he scores his goals from in tight. And I think that's such a projectable element. Even though he's just 5'11", 185, he's built like a tank. His lower body is so sturdy. Is he the most dynamic player in the draft class? Definitely not, but he's built like an NHL player. I think he'll be fit for an NHL bottom six role someday, and I don't think he's going to take the longest time to get there. So for him to be just a watch list, I got a lot of questions around that ranking. Another one that's going to raise some eyebrows around there is Viggo Björck, the highly skilled record breaker out of Sweden. As a B grade, not an A grade. And his frame has a lot to do with this. He is a small player. He's not very physically engaged. He gets out-muscled against bigger competition, but the skill is still so abundant, and I think he's a player that is going to burn you if you overlook too much. We had him ranked at 15th overall at Elite Prospects, which is already lower than consensus. You have some other outlets ranking him top 5, top 7, but he's 5'10", 172 pounds as a right shot center and / right winger. But the production is just so tough to look over. He's playing in the SHL against pro competition this season with Djurgården IF. He's gotten sent back down to the U20 here a little bit as well recently, but he was just playing bottom 6 minutes with Djurgården, and he put up a pretty solid 4 points in 11 games. But last season, he broke the all-time record for a U17 player or U18 player in J20 Nacional with 74 points in 42 games. That's a lot of skill to look over and pass on in the first round. So I think having him there is a little bit questionable, but we'll move on to another player, another one that I like a lot, and that's Landon Nycz, another NCAA player who was maybe underrated a little bit by Central Scouting. They had him as a C grade talent, so a 4th to 5th round range guy, but he brings a really projectable frame, 6'3". He skates well. He's a good puck mover, very mature in his decision-making. And overall, I think that there's definitely some limitations in terms of the dynamic upside, but that mobility, the comfort as a puck mover, these are things that are just quite special, in my opinion, for a player of his age. And to me, making a 1st rounder, let alone a 5th rounder. So I think that that's a bit of an oversight at this stage, but definitely a player I'm going to keep watching this season. So we'll see if some of those questions that maybe came up for Central Scouting come up for myself as well as I continue my process. But for the time being, that's one that raises my personal eyebrows. And last but not least, a player that has really been impressing a lot of our scouts at Elite Prospects, who has one of the best names in the draft class. It's Alexander Command. Or Command. I'm not sure about the pronunciation, but he's playing over in Sweden. He's a Swedish forward, playing in the Örebro system, a great development system overall. He's a 6'1", 183-pound left shot center. And so far in the U20, he's scored 8 goals and 16 points in 10 games. Been a really hot start for this player. And he's just constantly driving the play on his line. He's a real, skillful line driver, has a good one-timer on the power play. He's constantly getting to high danger areas. And he's also making himself open in terms of a passing option when his line mates get pressured. I think there's so much to like here. He flashes physical play, middle drive, and a really strong combination of smart reads and overall work rate. And I think that's the kind of thing that gets you drafted in the top 50 on draft day. And he's listed as a watch list player yet again. So a 6th to 7th rounder here by Central Scouting. We have him as a top 50 option, maybe even a 1st round contender at Elite Prospects. So a couple guys there to keep an eye on as potential buy low candidates. If you want to start hyping them up now, you might have a gem on your hands in a couple months' time. But that wraps things up here for us today. I'd love to hear your comments down below as well if you're watching on YouTube. Who are some of your favorite underrated players in the 2026 draft class, and what are your impressions of these rankings? It kind of marks the start of the scouting season when Central Scouting releases their rankings. You can argue it happens at the link. I can argue when it happens when the first rankings start coming out, even from us at Elite Prospects. But when Central Scouting puts theirs out, you know it's in full swing. And also, just a shout out to Central Scouting here, a very helpful resource as somebody that also works in the scouting industry, as just an outlet where you can kind of get a bunch of names as well to kind of get on your radar. I can personally say I added 10 to 15 guys playing the USHL that are like watch list guys for Central Scouting as late round candidates that weren't on my radar previously, that I may have watched once here, once there in passing, but haven't been focusing on yet. So really helpful with their board to kind of get those names, just keep an eye on as potential draftable talents. So that wraps things up here for us today. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always greatly appreciated. And for your second listen, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything that you need to know to build yourself a sustainable and competitive fantasy roster. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I'll catch you tuning in again very, very soon.